Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 153, and it's part one of what I'm calling The Island. I don't really know if that will be the final title. This is going to be a multi-parter, and this is just the first part, but we'll start with that as a working title for now, and we'll go from there. Done loading? Let's make for the mainland. Carden Ovsprun, tall and lean, climbed into the boat and helped his 3 children in. He was glad that they were old enough now to help. His oldest, Tristan Gwensprun, was 12, his middle child, Morgan Gwensprun, was 10, and his youngest, Keir Gwensprun, was 6. All had been accepted as his child by their mother. Keir, of course, was really of little help, but Carden would hardly bring his attention to this. Not only was he too young, Keir had been born with one lame leg and was constantly trying to keep up with his 2 older siblings. Carden looked on Keir with a sort of pride he knew he felt about his other children, but seemed much fiercer when looking at his determined youngest child. Once they were all settled, Tristan cast off and took a paddle at the front, while Carden took the oars. It would not be a long row, no more than an hour, as the mainland was already visible ahead of the little craft. The fish had been covered with cleaned linens, but the smell of the fish, some fresh, some salted, and some salted and dried, filled the boat, even with the breeze. Though the fish they caught were a staple, and indeed they had some every day, he still enjoyed the smell, especially on market day. It smelled of opportunities. Their island was, after all, only perhaps 1,000 meters long and a quarter of that wide. There were on the whole of the island less people than the village his family were rowing towards, 156 at the annual winter solstice counting. They did not know how many were in the village of Dunhaven, as the village did not keep count in the way they did, but it was certainly far more. Carden wondered if it would be called a town soon instead of a village. Its relative isolation from other towns and villages meant that it had the amenities normally found only in larger communities, and that in turn attracted more people. He suspected there were half again as many people in Dunhaven as there were when he was a youth, yet it still got little attention from the wider world. He pulled at the oars and saw Morgan's line stretch out behind the boat. She let it drift close to the side so the oars would not tangle it. Soon after, he saw Keir's line go out behind the boat, but on the other side. He was imitating his sister. He also heard Tristan, ever the responsible eldest child, paddling away and doing much of the steering. Carden allowed him that feeling of control, though he allowed one corner of his mind to check that they were heading towards the safest part of the shore. He let his mind drift, and as it often did, it went to Gwen. They had started off as most of the islanders had, by playing around with other partners, but they'd found gradually, but inexorably, that they were most happy with each other. So it had now been since before Tristan's birth. Some found multiple partners and were happy in little knots. Others moved from one or more partners to others. But he and Gwen, as perhaps the majority did, found their contentment just with one partner. With thoughts of his youth and the love that had grown between him and Gwen, the mainland approached. Tristan had guided them well, and Carden slowed the pulling at the oars. He saw Morgan's and then Keir's lines get pulled back into the boat. Neither had caught anything, but that hardly mattered. They'd set out early, but not so early that their morning feeding time hadn't been mostly past. They pulled up and tied onto their usual pier. Carden climbed out of the boat and went to get one of the wagons. He was back in a few minutes, and they loaded the wagon up. It was low and flat and easy to pull without any animal. Soon they had set up their little market table, mere yards from the end of the pier. Tristan was by Carden's side, and Morgan was, as she preferred, wandering about the other stalls, especially those with clever or beautiful handmade goods. Keir pointed at the nearby beach from the end of the dock, and Carden nodded at him. Keir hobbled towards it. Carden knew what Keir wanted. He wanted to be in the water. The deformity that kept Keir from walking well did not hamper him in the water at all. He had naturally fallen in love with swimming and did it as much as he could. 6 or not, Carden completely trusted his youngest in the water. The boy swam like a dolphin. It didn't matter that the beach, unlike the pier, was not protected from the waves. He would dive through them like a breeze through an open doorway. The sales of their fish went well, and soon they had little left but a bit of the salted bass, which would keep anyway. Carden asked Tristan to watch the stall, and he took the money to do a bit of shopping himself. Morgan appeared as if from nowhere, as he suspected she would. "Padre, they're the cutest little animals in dresses over here. Molly makes them." Molly, Carden knew, was a clever knitter and artist who made many things the young girls all went wild for. But he didn't want to disappoint her. "How much?" he asked. 8 coppers for a little one," she replied nervously. The market was the one time of the week they usually had actual money. They bartered on the island the other days, mostly. Carden thought about it. "Okay," he said. He pulled out 8 coppers and gave it to her. Morgan disappeared. This also meant he should get some small thing for the boys, even if it was less than 8 coppers. He decided on some jerk beef. There were no cows on the island, and fish was their staple meat, so the beef was quite a delicacy. Carden had a soft spot for it himself. He went to the jerky stand and bought a good-sized bag, which would give him and the boys a couple of pieces each, perhaps one for Morgan as well, and some for Gwen, though she wasn't particular for it. She likely would give it or trade it to her friends. Finally, a trip to the Arbory stand. The Arbories kept bees, something that didn't happen on the island at all, and was rare for miles around here on the mainland. Everything they sold was wildly expensive. The honey was 3 silvers for a small jar. They even had candles, 6 silvers each. It was half of what they'd made for all of their fish. But Carden plunked down 6 silvers for a lovely fat beeswax candle, which he was sure would keep them in evening light for a month, since it was as wide as 3 of his fingers. With care. He knew how long it took Gwen to make rushlights and how she disliked doing it. The fish oil they had to use wasn't ideal for the purpose. It took a lot of time to get the oil and gave poor light. This was, as much as anything, a gift of her own time back to do as she liked. He knew she would love it. He went back to the stall. Tristan was tidying up. He had sold the last of their fish. Carden thanked him for his effort and gave him a piece of the beef jerky, which his son chewed on happily. Carden took the rest of the money and put it in his pouch, then pulled out 4 copper pennies and gave it to Tristan. "Save or use, it's for you to decide," he said. "Thanks, Father," Tristan said. He put it in his own little pouch at his waist. Tristan was a saver. Carden had no idea how many pennies he had saved over the past few years, but suspected it added up to a good amount. He hoped his eldest son wouldn't grow up to be a miser. Morgan sidled up to the stall, new doll in hand. Carden held out his hand, and Morgan placed the new doll into it. It was a little mouse, but upright like a person, and dressed in a little yellow knit dress. He handed it back to Morgan, who did not put it in her pouch, but rather held on to it as though it were a small child. Tristan knew what to do. He went to the beach, looking in the water for signs of his brother, who would surely still be swimming. Carden picked up the cloths and the few other oddments they needed to take back with them, and put them over his shoulder. No cart needed. Today Kier was easily found, and he was following Tristan back towards the pier. Morgan was at his heels. Tristan offered to help Carden with his load, but Carden smiled and declined. He went ahead, with Kier following as best he could. Some local boys were horsing around. Carden smiled, mostly at memories he had of doing similar things when he was young. One boy pushed another, and that one, skinny arms flailing, red hair flaming in the afternoon sun, tripped at the side of the pier near their boat. He pinwheeled his arms wildly, making his friends laugh, then went over the side. But he did not go in cleanly. His head clipped the front of Carden's boat, making a snapping sound and leaving a red smear behind. His friends stopped laughing, shocked. Tristan, too, who was close to the boys and had seemed to want to join them on their horseplay before the accident, was looking down in the water, but not acting. But behind him, Kier was already hobbling past Tristan. He seemed to Carden to have a grim determination. He looked down at the water, picking his target, then dived in. The little boy came up with the unconscious teenager in his arms. He kicked and kicked, keeping his face and the boys out of the water, and he made good progress. Carden dropped his burden on the pier and ran back towards the shore. Kier made good progress, and Carden tossed off his belt with its pack near the edge of the water and waded hard towards his son and the hurt youth. "Well done, Kier," he said when he got to him. He was in water up to his armpits and grabbed the boy from Kier and pulled him toward the land. Soon he had the boy laid out on the shore. He pushed his stomach and water gushed from his mouth. He flipped the boy over and pushed on his abdomen from the back. More water came out, then a gasp as the boy breathed. Carden realized he had been holding his breath too as he breathed deeply and with relief. He gave another smile to Kier. "You got him in time, son." The head wound was a nasty gash on the side of his head, but didn't look to be too serious. The boy's friends brought his father, and the man thanked Carden, who accepted it with all humility. It was Kier who got to him fast, he said. The man thanked Kier too, though he looked surprised at the boy's age. Soon the boy's cut had mostly stopped bleeding, and his father took him towards home. Carden put his belt back on, and they put the cloth back in the boat and headed home. And that's the story for this week. Obviously, like I say, this is part one of a longer story, possibly a much longer story. This could be one of the longer ones I have in mind. So this is just touching on a few of the sort of themes and events that I'm planning on for these folks, and I hope you're enjoying it so far. Hopefully you can tell, like, it's, the setting is slightly unusual, but also, like, kind of medieval sort of style, technology wise and that sort of thing. But anyway, hope you enjoyed it. See you next week. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music, copyright 2020, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.